Hi guys, it's Kelly Latavola here and I'm back with another video for Neat and Tangled. Today we are going to be creating a fall card. So I'm going to be using the Rice Paddies Stencil and the Calathea leaf set. It's a large set, it's got a lot of leaves in it, a lot of different ways to combine them, and so I'm going to do something that I've never done with them before. I wanted to put this in the background, this Rice Paddies Stencil, because this is hands down my favorite stencil. My paper is cut very large. This is 6 1/4 by 4 and no, by 5, 6 1/4 by 5, because I'm going to be doing some watercoloring. And I just wanted you to see that if it doesn't fit your piece of paper, you can kind of move it around. And because that stencil is drawn so organically, as long as you don't catch that straight edge, you're all good. It'll just blend in together and it's amazing. So because I use Distress Oxides, I'm making sure that this is good and dry. I'm setting that with my heat gun. And then I'm going to go in, because I want to do some embossing, I'm just going to dust some embossing powder over both sides of it just to make sure nothing is sticking, and I'm all set to start stamping. I'm going to be using the large Misty for this, the original Misty, because I'm going to stamp a leaf background. So the way that the Calathea stamp set is set up is they have an outline, they have inside like the veins of it, and then they also have some solids, so that way you can use it as a builder or you can use them separately. Today I'm just going to use the outlines. That's what you see me doing here. I'm stamping in Versamark ink after I've used my embossing buddy, and just to see where those shapes are, each time I'm going to put the embossing powder over just so I can see where to line up my next row of leaves. You can definitely heat emboss these in between. I actually found that with the insides that was substantially easier, but you don't have to. I was able to stamp this whole background with the Versamark and putting on the embossing powder, and I didn't heat set any of them until the end. So this is the last row here. And then I'm going to sprinkle on the embossing powder one last time, and then I'm going to heat set the whole background. I just found that to be faster for the outline. And like I said, when it came to, so once this is all good and melted, I'm going to go back to the Misty. I just wanted to show you here, you probably can't even see them because we already have that stencil down, but honestly by the time that this card is over, you're not even going to notice that that background is there. How funny, right? All about perception and what's going on in the card. So here I'm just taking the centers, just the vein part of it, and putting those inside the leaves, lining those up in my Misty. And then I'm going to, again, I already did the embossing buddy part of it, and then I'm going to stamp them with Versamark. And so the first one I tried to do them the same way, where I just stamped them, added the embossing powder, and then stamped the next layer. I found it just a lot easier to heat set these in between. The reason being that if I felt like I needed to use my embossing buddy again, I could. So sprinkling on that same Simon Says Stamp White embossing powder, going to heat set the whole thing, and you still won't be able to see very much of it because it's white on this background, but it's not going to be like that forever. You'll be able to see them in just a minute. So I'm going to tape down this paper to a board so I can do some watercoloring. I was recently out of town with some crafty girlfriends, and I never clean off my desk, like never. And because I was out of town and I had packed some things up, when I came home and I went to unpack, I was like, I should clean off at least part of my desk. So I did, and when I did, I found my Peerless watercolors. That's what these little strips of pigment are. If you've never seen Peerless watercolors before, basically it shows you the color on the front and then the pigment is gathered on the back. For the first row of leaves, I'm doing a wet on wet technique. So I'm using a number 8 round brush by the Silver Brush Company, and I am wetting all of the leaves. Then, because my paintbrush is wet, I just kind of like tap it or swirl it a little bit. You don't need to do very much. It's so highly pigmented. that's going to pick up that color, and then I'm just going to be able to take that to my paper and drop it right in. I did not mention I'm actually working on Bristol board. I should have done that. So here, like the orange, I kind of had to work for it a little bit because clearly that was one of my favorite colors when I was using them, and there's probably not too much pigment left. But the red one right below it, you can tell that there's a ton on there. I've owned these and I've used them multiple times for probably about 3 years. So it doesn't seem, and the squares are actually bigger. These are pieces that have just been cut down. The squares that you get are much bigger. So for the second row, I decided to do wet on dry. So you can see it doesn't give you as much movement, but it does give you a lot more control. So if you are like happy to just put the water down, drop the pigment in, let it do what it do, which is what I am. I don't need that much control over it with this type of technique. I'm not going for hyper realism. I'm just going for pretty colors. So you can do that. But if you really like that, having that control, you can do the wet on dry, and then your pigment's pretty much gonna, I mean, they will blend together, but it's not going to be as much as if you have a ton of water on there. For the rest of the card, I opted to do the wet on wet because I just prefer that looser look that it gives. For me, I do watercolor because I like that flow, those hard and soft edges, the way the colors mix together. If I wanted it to stay exactly where I put it, I just colored it with my Copics. So just going to proceed through the rest of the card. Now, the reason that I used Distress Oxides for that stencil, you can also use Distress Inks, but it's because they also react with water. So I knew when I put my watercolor over top of my leaves that it would work with that pigment. It would either lift it up or tone it back, or it would become part of, I knew that there was going to be some reaction with that, and I wasn't just going to have hard blue, like that broken china lines throughout my background. So just keep that in mind if it's something that you want to do. If you're using a dye ink, you may still be able to see it through your watercolor, which would probably be pretty too, but that's just not what I did here. As long as sometimes you'll see me going back into other leaves with more pigment because I wanted to deepen up the color. As long as your stuff is still wet, you can keep going back and dropping in color as long as you want. One of the things that I noticed with this is when I put the centers inside the leaves, they weren't perfect. And as I was painting, sometimes I was getting outside of the lines. And so in crafting, I think sometimes we have this very real idea in our head of what things are supposed to look like or what we want them to be, and we let that get us stuck. But let me tell you, if it doesn't fit into the box, that doesn't mean that it's not beautiful, and it's totally okay. So because in part of the areas I painted outside of the lines and not all of my centers matched up with my leaves, and I just decided to embrace that, and then I started intentionally painting outside of the lines. So the ones down at the bottom where I was trying to be a little bit more controlled with it, I went back and pulled some color out, and I'm going to add some splatters here in a minute. And so if your watercolor piece wants to be a messy watercolor piece, then let it be. Don't fight it. You're just going to end up frustrated with what you're doing and why, when it can be beautiful a different way. So I decided I was going to go back in. Now I'm using a number 2 round brush and adding some splatters. I added like the red splatters next to where the leaf was red, and the yellow next to where it was yellow, green by green, all of those things. And those are really the only 3 colors of splatters I added. While it's wet, sometimes you're going to get some blooming in other places. If you've watched my own personal channel, you know I'm totally obsessed with perfect pearls right now, and apparently I don't even care what color it is. I thought gold would be really beautiful with all these warm autumn colors, and so I'm mixing that up with some water. Right now my leaves are still wet, so when I'm dropping in this perfect pearls, it is going to spread into the water, and depending upon how much water there is how much it will spread. So I dried it, and then I wanted to just show you really quickly with Distress Inks, Distress Oxides, Zig Clean color markers, a lot of the watercolor products that are out there. If you sprinkle water on them and let it sit and blot it up, it will pick up the pigment. Peerless will not. There's very minimal pigment. So now that it's dry, I'm going to sprinkle some more gold perfect pearls, and those ones will stay perfectly round dots exactly where I put them. They won't spread at all. So this is all completely dry. I've cut it down to a regular size card, well, slightly smaller, to 4 by 5 1/4, so I could have a white border on it. I'm going to heat emboss my sentiment. This is part of the same Calathea set, and it says no act of kindness, however small, is wasted, which is totally true. And then, so I stamped that Versamark, did the white heat embossing, melted it. Apparently my garbage man is here. I don't know if you can hear that. And then when I was putting it together, I really, really wanted some gold floss in the background, except while I was cleaning, I found my Peerless, but I don't know where my gold floss is. I will tell you that this did work-ish. I like rubbed in the Perfect Pearls gold, and then that wasn't really working, so then I sprayed the string. It's just white, like embossing floss. Then I sprayed it and mixed it around. I spread it out, and then I basically chased it all around my desk while I dried it. It does have a shimmer to it. It gave more of like an old gold look. I would still prefer to use my regular gold floss, but in a pinch, this totally worked for me, so that I could just knock out the card with what I had. But I used Tombow Mono multi-glue to adhere my painted panel down to my card base. And like you can see, you look at those leaves and you barely even notice that stenciling. So I trimmed down my sentiment to like a little label. I also cut a vellum piece that was slightly larger. I'm going to pop that up on some foam tape, and I'm also going to take that gold thread and just kind of gather it in the background, hold it with my fingers, and then eventually pin it down with the sentiment. I'm not holding it there with anything else. I really wanted to add some more sparkle, so I pulled out some gold Neat and Tangled sequins just to accent the sentiment, but I really didn't want to do a whole lot to cover up that background that I spent all that time painting. So this is the whole card. I was really happy with the way that it came out. I hope that you guys will give this a try, whatever your watercolor medium, but I will link the Peerless below if that's something you're interested in, and I will catch you guys on the next video. Bye.